going to talk about are some basic data, and I think this was in the press day before yesterday. Everybody notes there is a discrepancy between the volume of material in the cavern and the volume of material in the sinkhole. The current volume of the sinkhole is about 500,000 cubic yards, or in oil field terms, 2.6 million barrels. That's a fair amount of dirt. A cubic yard is 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, and so there's a lot of cubic yards out there. The volume of fill in the cavern is about 2.3 million cubic yards. We know that from the sounding through the relief well, where the bottom of where the top of the fill was on the geophysical probe, and we know what the cavern looked like from the 2007 sonar survey of the cavern. So we know we've got about somewhere around 3 million cubic yards of fill, which is 16 million barrels. The volume of brine in the cavern is, ignore the 3.3, that is wrong. No, that is right, sorry. Getting a little confused from my own numbers. It's about 0.7 million cubic yards, or about 3 million barrels of brine still in the cavern. There's obviously a big unaccounted for volume here. We're working on trying to figure out where that volume came from. It obviously, we've got more fill here than we've got up above, and so something's going on between the sinkhole and the cavern right now. The seismic data that is going to be collected is going to help us understand that. I want to talk a little bit about stability monitoring. Stability is a key thing for what we're looking at here. In the order that Commissioner Welch issued to Texas Brine, they have to maintain the Oxy 3 pressure. We don't want any big pressure changes in the cavern. They are installing a continuous recording system of cavern tubing and casing pressures. As Mark talked about, that'll be tied into the alert system. This week, I believe they're installing a continuous water level recording system in the sinkhole itself, so we can see what the water levels are doing in the sinkhole on a continuous basis. Mark talked about the real-time seismic monitoring that's being implemented, and we're going to be obtaining very accurate elevation surveys. We've got the pre-collapse surveys, now we're collecting post-collapse surveys. And this is with aerial imaging or satellite imaging, and we're looking for how much subsidence have we had over an area. The next thing I want to talk a little bit about before I get into our current situation we're dealing with is the 2003 gas release situation. First of all, that was caused by a broken pipe going into a gas cavern. The pipe broke. They had unrestricted gas flow to the surface under fairly high pressure. The pressures in the cavern were around 1,500 psi. They had an open pipe in terms of a well to the surface. So the pressure could come up through this pipe. A large volume of gas accumulated in the aquifer. They went out, they drilled gas relief wells, and that vented the gas. The entire duration of that event was somewhere around 2 to 3 months, plus or minus. The gas was removed from the aquifer and the situation was under control. The other big thing on that one, of course, the cavern remained intact, and you had a finite source of gas in the cavern. The 2012 situation is markedly different. In the history of this type of event, this is very unique. There is no cookbook. There's not even any decent case studies that tell people how to proceed when you had a cavern collapse at 5,000 feet below ground. You've had a frack out to the surface in the form of a sinkhole, and you've got natural gas and crude oil coming in and bubbling up all over. We've talked to people all over the world. This is a unique situation. So I know people are frustrated, when's it going to get fixed, et cetera, et cetera. Right now, we've got to work our way through the problem, and we've got to do it safe so nobody gets hurt. So that's what's going on. We're doing this in a very urgent but measured way of approaching the problem. Because nobody's ever dealt with something like this. What we've got, and I'm going to kind of walk you through it. This is based on the data, the best data we've got. But basically, what we've got here, we had the cavern.
How about putting it up on the stage so everybody can see?
Yeah, we can see.
That's what we've been looking for.
Marty, is this being filmed so that you put on the blog?
Yes, it is.
We're not going to steal these as soon as they're going to be up here. I'm not going to run away with them right away. Before the collapse, we had a cavern that was close to the edge of the salt. The cavern had been properly plugged and abandoned according to all the regulations and industry practice. The cavern, the casing was plugged and the cavern was left full of brine. What happened? Over the course of 2012, people started feeling earthquakes. We started seeing bubbles, et cetera, et cetera. What we think happened was outside pressure from the formations right outside the salt dome exceeded the resistance that could be provided by the salt that was left outside the cavern. So the pressure outside was greater inside, and the pressure continually increased until the fluid pressure in the cavern essentially got so much that we had a frack out, for lack of a better term, a hydraulic fracturing that went from the cavern up to the surface. This is unprecedented, but I'm pretty sure something similar to this is what caused the earthquakes, the bubbles, and the sinkhole. So what we're left with right now, we've got about 3 million cubic yards of cavern fill in the bottom of the former cavern. On top of that, we've got about 200 feet of sludge. It's a very dense fluid, probably just really muddy brine is what it is. And above that, we still have some brine. And as Mark said, the hydrocarbons that were in here have now been removed for the most part. Outside of that, this was a lateral collapse. This was not the ceiling of the cavern coming down. It was a side collapse. The side blew in under pressure, and essentially we've now got a fracture zone that goes from the cavern all the way to the surface. That's why we've got a sinkhole. In addition, at the elevation of the cavern, there are up to 3 or 4 gas and oil production zones. Now, these are production zones that were tapped years ago. Almost all the wells have been plugged and abandoned because they weren't economically feasible to produce anymore. However, the gas and oil is still down there. It's just not economical to produce it right now. And where the gas and crude's coming from, it's coming from these oil and gas production zones, coming up through the fracture zone to the surface. Now the fracture zone, we know, has about 2.8 million cubic yards of void space in it, because we've got much more fill down here than I've got in the sinkhole. So it's loose rock. There's a lot of holes in it that are probably filled with primarily brine right now, but we do have gas coming up through this. I mentioned a few minutes ago, I think the gas, or the bubbles coming up in the sinkhole is a good thing, because now the gas, instead of coming up and spreading out in the aquifer and just coming out in the bayous, we've got a direct path to the surface. So the bubbles coming up in the surface, in my mind, are a good thing. So that's kind of the status that we see is going on right now. And the last slide is our path forward, and then we'll take questions. We're continuing to assess stability and gas migration to provide the information to the parish so they can make the decisions on when people can go back in their homes. That's our primary focus. However, we've got to do it in a measured manner, because we are dealing with so many unknowns on this one that we don't want to rush into a problem. Dr. William Pettit, he's with Itasca. He's a world-class seismologist who is under contract with us now, and he's going to be helping us out with the seismic data and determining what additional data is necessary so we can image this collapsed structure. The only way we're going to investigate the collapsed structure is with seismic data. We're not going to be able to drill holes into it. We've got to do it with seismic data. We're going to have OWR1. We're drilling it now. Hopefully it will be perfed early next week, and then we'll progress with that. After that's done, we're going to move over and unclog the perforations on the 3 wells we previously installed. The last thing I mentioned, Dr. Pettit will be assisting us with the seismic investigation of the collapse zone.